I am in Abbotsbury on the Jurassic Coast in England. And I have come to visit the Steady Waves Center for Contemplation.
Wow, how's it been?
Excellent.
That's A+ rating.
Okay, so
let's
come
go
on
in. All right.
Okay,
How do you feel in here?
I love it. Most of the images that I've seen are actually just in the back, so I'm kind of teased about the back, but actually really delighted with how incredibly welcoming this feels.
Oh,
when
that's
I
so
walk
nice.
in. Yeah, it feels, it's got really good energy, and it feels like it's got, I mean, like most of England, it's got history, which actually for our conversation is really important.
It's a thumbs up.
Yeah, it's a thumbs up.
It is old as hell in here.
Yep.
That looks pretty good. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we can do it. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. I am Tamara MacIntyre. For many years referred to as Dr. Mac.
Wow, really?
Yeah, that's, yeah.
That's cool.
When I was in practice, I was Dr. T, and then I was Dr. Mac for a lot of young doctors I was teaching. And that I've kind of like, it's still part of what I do. I do some teaching, I support and mentor mostly female docs, helping them in practice. And then the newer part of my business is really working with people in an end-of-life doula capacity. So that's kind of like conversations and personal experience and life experience that I've had that just, I've really kind of formalized a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have had so much one-on-one experience, not just from purely personal, but personal for me in the doctoring capacity.
Sure.
And there's just a lot of misinformation and a lot of misunderstanding and lack of awareness that I think we could be doing a much better job of. So I jumped in. And as I said to you before, the algorithm connects people that are communicating in a similar way, that are aspiring to see death education move to the forefront where it should be.
Yeah.
And not just in a funeral industry capacity, but in an understanding that it is as important to celebrate our life closures and our end of life as it is to welcome a birth.
Exactly. Okay, the battery died, but we'll see. So we're sitting in front of my friend Sophia's coffin right now, who you have been studying with lately, and that's the reason you're here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the best part of social media.
Yeah.
Is how it's connecting people. And so, yeah, I was introduced to you through Sophia and through her beautiful work and her communication, and then your collaboration with her. So this is all a women. Yeah, exactly. This is how like we're finding our people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I felt like this week for sure. So it's actually really, it's really great to be here with you.
I think it's very cool to be sitting in front of Sophia's coffin. You've now made your own coffin, and I'm here in a coffin workshop from like the 1800s, the 1700s. It's almost like time is just happening all at once.
I think we're in this really special moment in time. And so I think if you're, you kind of consider you're on another side of a pandemic, and so people in some way have been reflecting on their own health, maybe on their own mortality, maybe an awareness that we were living on automatic pilot. And all of those things are the perfect opportunity to wake people up. Your place is such an amazing concept to me that I had to come.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's such an honor because you traveled like 2 hours by bus to get here.
I did.
So good.
It's so
I felt
good.
a bit guilty, like, wow.
No.
But, no, it's nice because I was saying earlier that it's very rare that someone makes the kind of like pilgrimage, like the journey to come here, because it is a little bit out of the way.
Yeah.
But I just think it's cool when someone can make that effort and And visit.
There's no exchange for human connection. For as much as we can have the illusion that we can meet people online, but it's still not the same as actually. I mean, I knew who you were as soon as you walked into the cafe, for sure, right? But there's no exchange for what is that going to feel like when we're actually sitting in the same space.
Battery died again, so.
Fostering agency is something I talk about all the time.
Yeah.
And agency is about the creativity and the thoughtfulness. And it's there's a researcher out of Stanford that I really reference all the time because his specialty is agency. And so agency means action. And so in this realm, it requires, like, if people are going to be thoughtful about their legacy, if they're going to be, thoughtful about how they want to die and what that's going to look like for their families on the other side, then it requires certain things. And to be intentional, to be focused, requires action. And that's really where the planning piece kind of comes from is, people need time.
Yeah.
They need to know what their choices, or what are their actual choices.
Yeah.
And it's only in that space can they feel solid in their ability to actually ask for what they want.
Yeah.
So I feel pretty strongly about it.
Agency.
Agency.
And do you think that certain groups of people are kind of more apt to be allowed agency than other groups of people?
Yeah, I mean, it's like so much of the world privilege.
Yeah.
Who feels comfortable standing up and saying what they want?
Yeah.
How much of that dynamic becomes oppressive? I think it's really difficult for lower socioeconomics, minorities. I think because we're in that space of talking about justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it can't just be a concept. It has to be applied. And and I think there's such a prevalence of inequity in dying now.
Yes.
That needs to be brought to the forefront in conversation.
In so many different ways and layers.
Yes.
They all affect each other as well. So it's like a whole domino effect.
Yeah, whether it's your culture. I was reading in LA, there was a hospice, a Japanese hospice that was shut down. And the conversation was, well, where can somebody that's Japanese go and have their culture respected as a life is closing? And it's just like one small example. So who is taking responsibility to educate the healthcare community? How, it's really the onus of a funeral director to know.
Right.
That it was also interesting to me, like if you are of a culture that doesn't embalm, the education to become a funeral director requires the skill set of embalming.
Yeah.
So it means we inherently do not have funeral directors that are from cultures that don't embalm.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is inequity.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So entire cultures will not have access to a funeral director that understands them. And there's more recently there was a mortician that was sort of dialoguing her decision matrix because she actually, as a mortician, has not actually put together her advanced care plan.
Right.
And so there she is talking, like, with all of her knowledge set, still not sure what her decision will be as far as human disposition.
Right.
And then realizing from a cultural perspective, if she died in an accident versus if she died in a natural disease process, that she would actually have to have two different plans because of culture.
Sure. Oh yeah, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think people don't realize that. Yeah, and it's I think if people understood, like, funeral directors, like, the idea when people look at the cost of a funeral, like a conventional, really conventional, what most people are choosing, and they're looking at that kind of bill, they don't realize where that bill came from, nor do they have the actual capacity in their grief to really make other decisions, because the cost doesn't have to look like that.
It sure doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty hard to do it when you are in the throes of losing somebody. Like if you're losing your person and then they've not actually put plans together or communicated their wishes,
Mm-hmm.
then that's the classic, like, you know, not wanting to leave a mess behind. Like it starts then,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if that's the situation, there's so much guilt involved, like either way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I've talked a lot about like pre-planning and
Mm-hmm.
being communicative about your wishes and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I don't think many people think about how much potentially of a burden it is to
Mhm.
not state your wishes, or even to say, actually, I don't care.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
personally, I don't actually care that much. I
Mm.
just don't want to, for my the fact of me dying, to harm the planet and
Mhm.
harm the people I love and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But just the not knowing, it can cause a lot of suffering for the loved ones,
Yeah.
because they don't know if they've done the right thing, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of, depending on religious beliefs and things like that, there's a lot of, yeah, like guilt that can
Mhm.
happen, and just unsure
Mhm.
feelings. And
I always sort of, to motivate people to make plans, I basically say, like, to be clear, there's three main goals of planning. Like, why
Mhm.
should you plan in advance?
Mhm.
One is for you to actually be able to make your own decisions, so
Yeah.
to have that autonomy of decision
Mhm.
making. Two is to do exactly what you just said, which
Yeah.
is unburden the decision maker.
Mhm.
Like, really, just unburden them.
Yeah.
And give them either permission to do as they wish, knowing that
You
you're
don't
going to
care.
love them either way and you don't
Mhm.
care, or tell them what you want.
Yeah.
And then the third one is peace of mind.
Yeah.
It's just your own peace of mind.
Yeah.
Because the likelihood you're going to get everything you want is small,
Yeah.
but the likelihood you're going to get what you want if you never ask for it,
Zero.
yeah, right?
Zero.
Zero.
Yeah.
Right? It's more uncomfortable and more trauma causing to your loved ones to not
Mhm.
than it is.
Yeah, to talk about
To talk
it
about
and
it.
get clear on it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
When you realize that, it can be a good entryway into that conversation, right? Like, maybe you want to talk to your mom about it, or whoever it is.
Mhm.
You can say, Mom, I'm not planning on dying anytime soon, but this is what I want.
Mhm.
What would you like?
Yeah.
I think that's maybe the most softest and gentlest way
Yeah.
to bring up that conversation, because I do think a lot of people are very intimidated by even bringing that up in the
Mhm.
first place.
Mhm.
Or even just asking, Mom, do you have things written down?
Mhm.
If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine, but do you have things written down so that I can know when you go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And doing it and doing, I mean, this is part of it. It's like, it's one thing when it's your parents.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the capacity to be that facilitator for them, but you might not also be the right person to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's, I always sort of say to people, like, to enter the conversation is going to feel more threatening for you to want them to plan
Mhm.
than it is for you to say to them, so I've planned and
Mhm.
I'd just like to share it with you,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Mhm.
I want to really, and that's the unburdening. It's like,
Mhm.
I'm going to just share with you what I've learned, what I want, not because I think you're going to need to know tomorrow, but because I need the peace of mind.
Yeah.
So if you could just do this for me and
Mhm.
listen.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that also works because you're
I
just
think
going
so.
through your own process, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think if each person takes care of themselves in that way,
Mhm.
it can have the ripple effect of,
Yeah.
being more peaceful later on for
Yeah.
everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, that was the interesting thing about, my time with Sophia. I mean, I didn't tell people I was coming to England to
Mhm.
weave a coffin.
Oh, you didn't?
Some of my friends knew, but I also...
We were just, the camera, it died again.
Yeah.
This is the whole theme of this situation right here. I didn't charge my batteries, but
We're good.
I was just saying, or asking
Mhm.
you about how you said you didn't prep people on your travels. So you didn't say, I'm going to England to weave a coffin with Sophia. And then you started to post about it, and like, what was that reception like from people who knew? Because obviously your friends and stuff, they know that you are
Yeah.
interested in this.
Yeah, and some of my friends were willing to, like one of my friends was like, okay, this is kind of weird, right? It was sort of like, oh, this is kind of weird. But then she got into it. Then it was like, oh my God, it's beautiful.
Okay.
Right?
So
And
got
then
into it in like an admiration way.
Totally.
Yeah,
I had somebody else write that said, I am so, like, this is so amazing. Like, I just keep posting.
Whoa.
Like, even just, it was sort of like, because I was sort of, there's the actual skill and the artistry. It's not just like, there's so many different elements,
Sure.
right? So I was equating working with the willow, like working with clay and learning the medium, and then actually watching the gifts that Sophia was sharing with me, and then just like my mind blown with like human ingenuity, like like it's a marvel. Even little aspects of it, it was like when the rope went in and the decision was, are we going to do 4 or 6 handles, right. How many pallbearers, how big it needs to be for certain hand sizes, and then actually the weaving of it, and just thinking, like, there was a moment where I just thought, like, of course it needs to suspend human weight, and it needs to be secure. And then the idea that these basket skills became this utility, like there was just so many different elements. So it's been fun because it was somebody who was like, okay, like I just have to tell you, like I just keep checking to see what's the next video, what's the next, like what's the next communication. And then I had somebody who wrote, a young doctor, newer in her career, and she wrote me a personal note and said, I just have to say, I'm so familiar with birth doulas and choosing something that's not conventional, and the necessity of planning and celebrating a life. She's like, my aha moment listening to your video was, why aren't we doing this on the other end of life? Like, why are we not? It's the same thing. Yeah,
and even like the process of dying, like the labor of dying is very similar to the labor of birthing. And I think what people don't really think about that much is that our bodies know how to do it. It's like we have so much fear and agony surrounding death, and it's so like generally negative, which makes sense because we're like losing someone, but it's just as much a part of life as birth. And birth, there's so much pain and so many things that can go wrong, and but like our bodies know how to do it. We've been doing it for all of humanity, and that labor of dying, and there's like a real process that the body goes through to die, and people need to know about that, and actually like certain aspects need to be celebrated, just like we encourage people birthing, like you can do it, like why isn't that, it's like we sometimes we say it's okay to go. That's really lovely when people give other people like permission to go. Some people need to hear that, but your doctor friend was totally right. Like I totally agree with that.
It's interesting, right? It's like your value system and trusting the innate wisdom of the body, and your choices as far as walking gently on this planet, and all of those value systems are actually viable choices in end of life, but people don't actually necessarily know it. And then the other big part is, there's that classic, like, when you have the people who just don't want to talk about it and are in denial, but if you're really kind of talking about like what's holding humans in suspension, being held in chemistry is holding people in suspension. And so I'm naturally, for myself personally, I'm naturally curious about what's really happening for us. It's like that real push to extend quantity of life. And where's that space that the innate intelligence actually can titrate the chemistry on its own to mediate pain, to allow us to go deep enough into our consciousness to be able to reconcile what's happening, the necessity of talking about how the body shuts down, the necessity of talking about food, and that food is for living, not for dying. And
people have so many hang-ups about that specific thing, like thirst and hunger.
With the idea that you are, that dehydration is going to cause your death. Well, Yeah.
Yeah.
That
That's
is
kind of the point.
That is the point, right? And
Yeah.
so, and even just, you know, I believe that is how the body titrates the right chemistry
Sure.
in order for the exit to be as peaceful as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
Right?
And we have to shift that thinking to, you know, because like to a living person, sure, withholding liquid is not good. That's like torture.
Yeah.
But to a dying person, like that is a gift. They don't need hydration any longer.
Right.
They don't need nutrition any longer.
Right.
They actually just need to be left alone so the body can do its thing and peacefully die.
Yeah.
Like that is the natural process. And I think that, again, like a lot of suffering can be avoided if we just educated people a little bit about you know, how, and there's plenty of people doing a lot of really cool work about that, and there's like pamphlets and handouts and whatever, but I think that the general public, it's not there yet, is it?
It's not.
Talking about pain at the end of life, but maybe we should, I don't know, what should we talk, maybe it cut off, I'm not sure,
I
but
don't know either.
yeah, we were saying some really good stuff.
Yeah. I think pain's a big one. I think
Yeah.
fear is another one. It's interesting because one of the things within the end of life training is there will always be that, like, what kind of questions could you ask, or what kind of questions facilitate what kinds of, you know, additional conversation that need to be had. And I was challenged by in fear, it's sort of asking somebody, are you afraid of dying or are you afraid of being dead?
Yeah.
And if you just say those two questions, they are fundamentally different. Like there's certainly
Definitely.
some things that are shared. But when you actually dive into like what's the actual like basis of fear of dying? Like what is the, like at its core, what is somebody really, what about the dying process are they really afraid of? And so oftentimes it's pain and suffering.
I think that's majority of
Right.
that.
The fear of dying, it's like pain and suffering.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
it has to be investigated. Like like the relationship with pain, it's totally your choice to not experience or feel it.
It's the same as birth. Some people choose to go through that pain and not have an epidural.
Yeah.
Some people are like, give me that needle in my spine. You know,
Exactly.
it's like, whoa, I'm already rolling.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna cut it off here. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Any closing words?
No.
Really? No, nothing?
Okay, what are my closing words? I believe that it's our obligation as human beings to be there for one another.
Those are beautiful closing words.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Bye.